Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Mark from Solar Games, and today we are going to talk about a very interesting topic that's near and dear to my heart because I love economy and I love how interactions between different forces work. So, pretty much today we're going to talk about why a trading card game that's both popular and fun to play cannot go to zero. It actually just can't. It's not possible. So before we kind of start, we have to introduce the players in the field, pun intended here. First of all, players. So the players, what do they want? They want the cards to be cheap, they want decks to be accessible, and they want basically the game pieces to be as cheap as possible, something that's accessible, everyone can build them, right? Think how it feels to build a pauper deck, but they want that for everything. That's what most players want. And companies, what do companies want? So the company wants to make money, right? The company that's making the trading card game. Obviously, they want to maximize profit because, again, it's probably good for their shareholders, and that's their fiduciary responsibility to make sure their shareholders are taken care of. So again, if they make a product, they want to make as much profit on that product as possible. And then we have the investors, which, by the way, so all this time we talk about investors and people feel pretty dirty about it. Understand investors are also LGSs because, again, the investor's goal is very simple. They want to buy something at a lower price and then sell it at a higher price, make money, right? Again, that could be short term, could be long term, but basically they need to be able to do something where they buy something at a lower price, sell it at a higher price, and all sorts of formats of selling that, right? You break singles, run events, whatever. That's basically what those guys are doing. And then lastly, you have the collectors, and the collectors are more of the people who want truly rare game pieces, right? And in fact, the more rare a game piece is, the more they want that card or a piece or whatever. So the collectors are really in it to just get the best of something, whatever that may be. Yeah. So as I introduce this, these cast of characters into this economy game, you can probably start seeing why there's a problem, right? Why is it that we can't have a card game that's effectively very fun to play, very popular, lots of players, but also costs nearly nothing? And the reason for that is because, well, there's a big conflict of interest between all four parties. And that conflict basically drives this entire market. So here's why, right? So let's say we start with the players. Let's cater 100% to the players. Make sure all the game pieces are readily available. Cards are reprinted as much as possible to make sure that the game is fun and accessible, right? Now, first of all, let's ignore the interests of those other parties first, just collector or players first, right? So let's make some just random numbers here. Booster boxes, let's say $100 each. WotC, again, wants to make money, so they have to kind of set a certain price, but let's say it's $100 each, right? And then there's this thing about rarity. Remember, there is rarity in Magic. Not all cards are created equal. And the designer of the game, WotC, they understand that the better cards are more rare. And if you listen to all the, reasons for why they do this is because, well, part of this is, they want to have a fun draft environment. And you don't want a draft environment where every card is really equally good. And so they put the more better cards in rare. Again, there are some design philosophy as to whether this is good or not. Flesh and Blood, in fact, takes a different approach to this, where a lot of the good cards are just in common. So slightly different, but again, we're talking about Magic. We're not talking about Flesh and Blood today. So let's focus on Magic. The way the Magic works is that rares, mythic rares, tend to have better cards than your common uncommons, okay? So again, what happens, right? Rare cards are less printed, and again, less printed so that, more players want them because they're useful, and that drives up demand. So as demand goes up, what happens? Your investors look at the market and say, hey, this card is really high demand by players. They really want this card. So what they do is they go and buy boxes of sealed and convert that sealed into single, right? So by doing that process, they're basically bringing more cards into the market. Now, the only reason they're doing this is because effectively the EV of the box is higher than what they're paying for the box. Okay, so let's say your players pay $100 for the box to just play. Maybe your investor's really paying 80, 60, 70, whatever, some number below that number. And let's say the EV of the box is around 100, just to make it easy. That's how an investor would actually make money. Again, they're putting work into converting it by opening the box, taking a risk essentially. And even if they hold the box long term, they're taking an inventory risk. So if you think about how economy works in general, whenever you take a risk or put in effort, right, you're adding value, you have to also charge for that. So there's an upcharge for that kind of thing, right? So, if you're buying something like a booster box and you're holding a long term, you should pay a lower price or have an expected value later higher than what you're paying for it now, right? This is why booster boxes long term cost more than they do the day of release, because somebody had to take the risk, put it into inventory, so there's no reason why they should sell it for less than what they paid for or at par, right? Again, some other situations do apply here, but we're not really going to talk about those now. So basically, this is what happens with the normal model. Now, let's say the company says, hey, I want players to have cards be accessible, etc. So they print more boxes. Still, the boxes are at a certain price for collectors and it's at a certain price for the players. What's going to happen is that as there are more cards on the market, right, the demand is still probably the same, maybe slightly higher, but the supply is much higher now. So as supply comes up to meet demand, it will drive the price down for those cards. And as the price of the cards falls, and this is what you see with pre-sale, in the beginning when there's low supply, very few stores selling cards, and more players who don't have the cards, high demand, then essentially what you see is a high price for a lot of cards. This is why pre-sale cards are just more expensive. Some of the players are also, what they're paying for is the ability to have the cards earlier than others. Maybe they're taking it to a tournament, maybe they're brewing a deck already that they want to, make happen as soon as possible. So pre-sale, when they're buying pre-sale cards, they're also paying for the ability to use a card or 4 copies of a certain card earlier than everyone else. That's pretty much why the price is higher, pre-sale versus post, pre-release, etc., right? So as supply goes more into the market because Wizard is printing more product, it drives the price of all the cards down, of course, because there's more stuff, and the people who wanted that card probably already have it, and the people who didn't want it at a certain price are now buying at a lower price. So there's, again, the price starts falling down. And as the price falls, so does the EV. And there's a point where the EV goes below the price even an investor would pay. So we're not talking about players, we're talking about investors. So a store, LGS, etc., they of course pay less per booster box than you and I do, because we are not at that level to purchase the cards at the price that, again, the store would get those booster boxes for. So, but there's a point where the price will fall below that number. And what happens when the price of those cards fall below that number? Well, stores basically stop opening those products, because again, to them, why take the risk? Meaning, I do all this work, I open the booster box to lose money. There's no way anybody is smart enough to do this, right? So basically, most of the cards and supply in the market is going to wait on draft players, right? People who only play draft or sealed to open product and then sell the cards they don't need back into the market. But here's the problem: that doesn't have a ton of supply. Just so you can understand. If you want 4 copies of any rare, we're not even talking mythic rares, but any rare, by my calculation, my estimation, you would have to open probably around, I would say, 8 to 12 draft booster boxes of cards to get 4 copies of any one rare, right? And that's, as you can think about what's happening there, that's really tough. And one of the problems, it's not like players want evenly across all the rares of a set. In general, there's going to be a couple rares that's more focused and has a higher curve of demand than others, right? Majority of the others. So those cards will have to demand a much higher price because, just because I get 4 copies of a certain card when I open 12 boosters, there's a bunch of other rares that are just kind of bulked out. Nobody's going to want them. They're very cheap. So it's like I open 12 boosters for 4 copies of a certain card. Those cards better be worth a lot of money, because otherwise, what's the point of opening that many booster boxes for these cards? Again, expected value or expected drop rates for certain cards are going to be random. You may open a box and have enough, whatever. Could happen. It's rare, but it could happen. Just saying. But these are the high number, average numbers you can get, right? Or expect to get. Again, you could be really lucky, open 4 boxes and get 4 of the same rare that you want. Totally possible. But again, we're not talking about what's possible, we're talking about what's more probable. So at this point, you have players who, again, there's more product push on the market, but the problem is all the investors are kind of backing away because they can't make money on this product anymore. So what happens? The supply dries up, demand is still the same, those prices will have to go up. And as the prices go up, more investors are incentivized to come back into the market, open more product, sell it onto the market. So as you can see, even looking at it from the player's perspective, there is no way a popular trading card game like Magic can actually go to zero. Because again, if it goes to zero, what investor is opening these boxes to sell to the players, right? So let's take another perspective. Let's look at the company. This one's going to be pretty easy. So why does a company not want their cards to go to zero? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but a company does want to make money. So as they print these boxes, again, at $100 each to the individual players, they're making, let's say, $70. Maybe it costs them $30 or so to print the boxes, and they're netting about 70, along the way. Again, they don't actually net that much because they're not direct to consumer. And this is why WotC is trying so hard to go through Amazon, for example, to go direct to consumer, because they get more of that money. Because when they sell to distribution, again, these are all just example numbers, they're not realistic, but let's say the box costs them $30 to make each. This is their cost, R&D, paying the employees, salary, buildings, etc., right? Production. They're selling to distribution at around like maybe 50, 60-ish. That's it. They're not going to be able to sell to distribution at 100, okay? Because distribution has to make money. This is where all the middleman comes in, right? So between WotC making the card, the distribution who distributes the card, to the stores who sell the cards, buy from distribution, sell it to the end users, then the end user actually get the card. And this is why through those three different middlemen, the cards have to be a certain price, because everyone has to take a little bit off the top, and that's how they make their money. Okay, make sense? So this is what WotC has to deal with. So when they sell to distribution, let's say they double their money, which is still pretty good, right? It's $30 becomes $60. So they make $30 on every $30 they invest. Great, that's excellent. So what happens then is, as they print more product, there will be less demand in the market, of course, because there's just too much, right? And as you can see within the last 2 years, what's happened is that as WotC prints more and more product, they've realized, well, the market can't handle all the product. And so, of course, now they have more and more of the product sitting at home, and they have to send it out at discounts. Normally, they would have gotten a much better price. Now they have to send it out as discounts. And one of the challenges and issues with Amazon Dump, and why that's a really big problem for them long term, and maybe people aren't realizing this, but is that they are creating a price floor or some sort of lower price for a lot of their products. And essentially, yes, they're cutting out distribution and LGS. But what they're also doing is that now no longer will players pay for product from LGS and other sources. They're just going to go to Amazon, look at that low price, and wait until that low price happens. Again, because they can. While WotC doesn't necessarily lose any money doing this, you can imagine there's going to be less just events and this churning through of their product, because these other resellers of yours are no longer interested in doing any of that for you because, well, they're not getting paid for it, right? So just kind of thinking from the perspective of WotC, they don't want the card game to go to zero because, well, if they go to zero, who's going to pay for a box? If every card in the box is worth nothing or close to nothing, who's going to actually buy a box to open up to do any of that stuff? Even if you're a player, you wouldn't do that, right? I mean, nowadays especially, I hear a lot of players say things like, oh man, I opened this box, I lost money, right? And of course, the justification in general is, hey, but I had a lot of fun. The problem becomes, well, how much fun can they have if it's $100? I mean, I have some games on the shelves behind here. You can't see it, but even like some of these really big games, like Game of Thrones, right? The board game, or like Scythe and stuff like this, cost me $50, and I have so much replayability with it. You spend $100 for a box of draft boosters, and you draft like maybe once, maybe twice, and that's it. So it's something that you really have to think about with respect to, even as a player, like there's a point where you say, if the cards are worth nothing, why am I spending this much? Now, if you don't spend this much money, then Wizard can't make their money, right? And that's where it becomes really tricky. So this is why Wizards, the company in general, doesn't want their card game to go to zero, because if it goes to zero, no one's going to buy their card game, right? And they're not making money. So if they're not making money, why make the card game? Okay, so now let's talk about investors. This one is gonna, cause some people to feel a little bit maybe triggered about it. But let me explain what's happening, right? The investors doesn't want the card game to go to zero for the same reason usually as WotC, because they're a middleman and they want to be able to make some money off of this thing, right? If the product falls below a certain point of price, EV, to what they're paying, they're not going to open the boxes. Like I told you before, when Brothers War was basically tanking in price, what did I say? I said, I could just set my set boosters in the closet, not going to open them, leave them on the shelf. What that does is that it drives the secondary market to basically raise the price, because me and probably a ton of other sellers looked at the situation and said, we're not going to sell these cards. We're not opening product. So good luck. And because that happens, that causes basically the prices to go up because there's less cards in the market. Now, without so many cards, well, players still want to play and have to play. So, this whole like shift happens where players are saying, hey, I need the cards. So they're willing to pay a little bit more. And they're willing to pay a little bit more. And so that drives the price up until it hits a point where it makes sense for me to go reopen that box again. Again, this is what happened with like Urza and Mishra when they fell under like, I think at some point they were under like $10. I pulled my listings, I stopped selling, or I left the price as it was before, which is still back then below the current price. I think I had them at like $20 each. And of course, at some point they went to 30. I sold a couple at 30 because, well, when the price goes up, you got to, capitalize on that, right? And make sure you don't lose money on your investment. That's the smart thing to do. So this is why investors basically won't let this thing go to zero. And the funny thing is they actually don't care, because a good investor looks at many different card games at the same time. So if Magic goes to zero, then they're putting money into something else that is not going to zero. And this is where it gets tricky, because essentially if there's not enough cards in the market and all the investors kind of leave, or there's too many cards in the market and the investors leave, well, it's going to balance itself out and the cards will go back to having value again. Because again, just supply and demand, right? No one's going to play a losing game. Lastly, I come to the collectors. And this is very important, because I think this one thing that the collector wants is actually what's kind of in some ways making sure that the Magic is working. And I look at this because I see exactly what Flesh and Blood is doing. I see what MetaZoo is doing. I see what Pokemon's doing. And I think this is how you solve the problem. And this is probably what Wizard already knows. Remember, collectors, what do they want? They want the rarest game piece possible. They want those serialized cards. They want the shattered glass foils. They want the neon ink Hidetsugus. They want these pieces that are just super collectible. In fact, they probably want the Black Lotuses from the 30th anniversary, right? That pissed enough people off yet? So again, they seek the hyper rare, and this is the key. What this does is it drives more product to be open. Well, if I seek a hyper rare card and it's truly super rare, it's actually really hard to get, then essentially the sellers are going to be the investors, right, who are catering to them, are going to be able to say, oh, I'll just open more product because I can try to hit that one card and sell it to this guy for thousands of dollars, right? And so the investors are opening more product to sell to the collectors. The players are probably doing the same thing. And the company, WotC here, for example, is able to print more product because, well, there's more chase for these special rare cards. And so they can print more cards to be able to kind of meet the market, right? Now, they can't overprint, which is what they've been doing. That's why they're screwing everything up right now. But at a certain point, they can actually print more because they're helping, the collectors are kind of driving the economy of the whole thing. And so as collectors seek these super rare cards, what happens when they open a ton of product and they're not, and let's say they get their card, they don't want that more like normal rares and mythic rares. So most of those go back onto the market as singles. And essentially, they're trying to fund their chase for the super hyper rare card. So when they put this stuff onto the market, they can do it at like, basically at cost, maybe even a little bit lower, because again, their chase is not for those cards. They don't want them. They're wanting the cards that are like this hyper rare. So your normal playable cards become a lot more accessible because of this. And this is exactly what happens. Now, again, remember, if all the cards at some point go to zero and it doesn't make sense to open boxes anymore, even the collectors will stop doing it. So that's why you have to balance it. But with this model in place, You essentially have two markets of people that want two different things in the box. And so they can both open more product, get the thing that they want, and sell to each other the thing they don't want. And in this way, you can actually have a market that's actually pretty healthy, right? Both pieces are less expensive, and then be able to kind of drive more product opening so it actually meets the needs for the company. Again, why do we need to keep the company in place, right? Why do we need to cater to WotC? It's pretty simple. They make the game. If at some point it doesn't even make sense for them to make the game because people aren't buying it, well, it dies, right? When the investors leave, right, it's just, again, direct to players, the players have less access to the cards. Guess what? The players leave. If the players and the investor leave, who's going to buy the product? In fact, I would even argue if majority of the people who are purchasing the product are just players, it probably won't be enough, truly. So when an investor like myself goes and buy product, we're not buying 1, 2, 3 boxes. We're buying cases. We're not even buying 1, 2, 3, 4 cases. We might be buying pallets. So that's what happens, right? Again, whenever I look at a specific card or whatever, I'm not going out there buying 1 or 2 copies of that card, right? Or let's talk about draft boosters here, right? So for example, Commander Legends, Baldur's Gate, set everyone hates. Whenever I purchase Baldur's Gate, I'm doing a couple cases each time. So 12, 18, 24 boxes at a time. I'm doing that because I can get volume pricing. I'm doing that because, again, if I see the opportunity, I'm going to go kind of pounce on it. But what that does is that actually drains all the supply from the market. And it helps Wizard to basically alleviate, because if people like myself and LGSs aren't draining the supply from distributors won't order more from Wizard, and Wizard won't print more. So you understand, the more of these that are kind of going through the system, there are actually more cards available for everyone on the market because of that. So that's why this system works this way. I think honestly, the way that you would do this is to make sure that you satisfy and meet the needs of both the players, make sure that the game is fun, but also the collectors, because you have to have something that people can chase after. So in a really weird way, I hate collectors boosters, but I see that what they're doing, and I see why this would help long-term for the game. So I guess I'll just leave it there. I hope this is helpful in illuminating basically why there doesn't exist a scenario where a very popular fun card game exists and also the cards are cheap or zero. Just pretty much can't happen. I would even say, look, don't get mad that the card game is expensive. Get creative. Think of different ways to maybe build decks that can, trump the top tier decks using the expensive cards. I remember doing this a lot. I think it's a little bit less accessible now, but I remember running red deck wins, right? Everyone knows you build a mono red deck and it's not that expensive, and sometimes you can trump Bant decks and stuff like that. Again, this is back in Eldraine, so again, your miles may vary, but that's what I did back then, and I was able to, rank up in Arena decently in Standard without having too much problems. So there are ways you can do this without having the best deck or the most optimal. And I would just encourage doing that, right? Maybe that's the right thing to do instead of worrying about certain cards costing too much or whatever. And be happy. Be happy that your cards cost a lot. And here's the thing. It's really weird when I say that, but if the cards cost a lot, that means the game is good and it's thriving. That means people are buying the cards and playing in decks. When cards are worth nothing, your game is dead. Peace.